fellow members of the Augsburg community, once more we find ourselves in mourning. We have all been shocked and saddened by this terrible deed. Our hearts go out to the family of Dr. Martin Luther King, and on your behalf I am sending a message to her. Our hearts go out to the Negro community. I was with the leaders of that community for a couple of hours last evening, and I know how they feel. But I think we mourn most of all for ourselves, we who are a part of white advantaged America. We must not let the shock of this, however, paralyze our thought and our action. My mind went to the words of Nehemiah when he prayed, "We have sinned. We have sinned against thee, we and our fathers." We must confess our part in all of this. There will be those who will attempt to excuse and say this was the deed of a sick person, who will refuse to accept this guilt. But I believe that we who are a part of white advantaged America share as surely as the German nation shared guilt for the destruction of the Jews. Mourning in the Christian context must always confess, "Lord, have mercy upon us." Then I believe we examine examine our own hearts. How much of what caused this is resident right here? We must not be so naive as to think that racism does not exist in the Augsburg community. Therefore, in all humility, I am asking the Negro students in our student body to tell me and tell you really how it is, so that we might uncover any subtle prejudices of which we may not be aware, but which are hurting our Negro brethren. Yesterday at the faculty meeting, it was decided to hold a day in May when we would set aside everything and just listen to the minority communities. I'm not sure whether we can do that now or not. They may not be willing to talk to us. But we must be ready to listen, and above all, to examine our own hearts. Then as a community, we must believe. An act of faith is now called for. An act of faith that believes that Dr. Martin Luther King did not die in vain, and that his death will change hearts. As Christians, we believe that Black Friday is followed by Easter. And then as a community, there must be some action. Something must happen to memorialize Dr. King, to perpetuate what he stands for, and to heal our people. Many people have stopped by my office already with suggestions. It's not possible in this moment to act on all of them or any of them. But I would suggest that if you have anything to suggest, that you put it down on a piece of paper and leave it in the dean's office or in my office, and it will be considered. This is a day of mourning. Let every class at Augsburg College today be conducted in memory of Dr. Martin Luther King. I think it is most fortunate that we have as our chapel speaker this morning Dr. Bernard M. Christensen, the distinguished President Emeritus of Augsburg College. I know that he has a message for us in this hour. Dr. Christensen.
Dr. Anderson and dear friends, many fine tributes have been paid to Dr. Martin Luther King last night and this morning, and I'm sure they are still continuing on television. And Dr. Anderson has surely said the right things for us here today. Some of the Negro speakers, several of them, in fact, called for action, not only words. And that's what we've been called to this morning. And it's a wonderful thing in an hour like this to be gathered together, even by our presence, to show honor and gratitude to God for the man who has been called away. I remember the day in January 1948 when Mahatma Gandhi was struck down by an assassin. Our hearts were filled with sorrow. The Augsburg choir sang that day before the Minneapolis Rotary Club. Now, 20 years later, I suppose we could call him the second greatest apostle of nonviolence in our time, has been struck down. Death sets a man's life and work into perspective. I think we've all experienced that. We thought of it a few days ago when we gathered in memory of Dr. Kalachi. But it's true again and again. And so it's true of Martin Luther King today. As the mountain moves away from us, we see it in clearer perspective. And so we think of him. We admired him before. Maybe we've praised him before. But we feel that a great new riches has come, simply in his being taken away from us. This is a mystery of life that we cannot understand. But we know that it's true of those who are close to us or those who are part of our life in a little more distant way, as Dr. Martin Luther King was for all of us. In the talk which I had prepared to give this morning, but which I laid aside, I was going to mention several great books as one of the treasures of life. I passed them all by, and I'll just mention one. Martin Luther King's Strength to Love. It would be a fitting memorial. It would be a fitting personal act if many of you would buy that book and read it and ponder its message. There's a great work to be done in America today. Some of the Negroes who spoke on TV, you heard them. They threaten dangerous things, terrible times, but not all. But in any event, there's a great work to be done. Strength to Love is a book that every one of us can study with profit. I was going to mention some great men and women as a source of inspiration to life. I passed them all by too and mention only Dr. Martin Luther King and two or three of his friends. One of them was called to the television within an hour after his leader and co-worker had been slain. One of his close workers, they called him to the television and asked him, what does he think of this? And he told us, like a new Edith Cavell, that there must be no bitterness in our hearts. We must follow the path that Dr. King has set before us. we must answer with love. And then some of you, I'm sure, perhaps many of you, heard that wonderful interview on, well, CBS last night. Some of the same ones were on the day program this morning. And there was Roy Wilkins, a St. Paul boy, one of the great Negro men of today, with a wonderful face, a face that's been chiseled from within. And you heard what he said. And then, on that same program this morning, we called on Mayor Carl Stokes of Cleveland. And some of you heard his words, perhaps, even if it's in the class time. And he had the same message. And the pastor who was called to pray at that meeting in Carnegie Hall last night, on the spur of the moment, I suppose, of course, said, "The king is dead. Long live the King of Love forever." Now we ask ourselves, what is the meaning? I'm sure that we're all asking that. What is the meaning of this for you and me? The meaning of this death. As has already been mentioned this morning in the prayer and in the address, Dr. King took his Christianity seriously. On all points, he may not have interpreted Christianity exactly as we do, but he followed the light as he saw it. I don't like to say those words even, because that suggests that I think he was off the beam somewhat, and I'm not saying that. Yesterday afternoon, for quite a long time, a young student friend of mine who is struggling with the problem of nonviolence and conscientious objector status and the draft board and all that, we sat over in Mr. Steak's restaurant over here, and we were talking about the fact that to a very large extent, we don't take our Christianity seriously. My young friend had 2 books with him. One was on both of them were on nonviolence. Gotten them from the library while I was downtown doing something else, and he had them with him. But not only in relation to nonviolence, but in relation to 1,000 things. We more or less play with Christianity. We don't dare to step out even on the things that we know. Now, there are many things that are obscure to us, but even the things that we know, we don't dare to do it. And I believe, and I know that this is what is in Dr. Anderson's message to us today too, that this is a call for action. Something should happen. It shouldn't just be another memorial service or so on. And it can be. I read again recently Theodor Herzl. He was a young Jewish reporter, journalist from Vienna, up and coming. He was assigned to cover the trial of Dreyfus in France. You know, that, I suppose, the most famous trial in all modern French history, with the tide of anti-Semitism sweeping through it. And he sat in that courtroom, that reporter, and there was born in his soul there on that day the vision of a new Israel. He wrote the book called Judenstaat, a nation of Jews. And he set out to carry that out. He lit the torch and carried it on until Israel was founded. And a few years ago, they took his body from Vienna. He died at the age of only about 40. And they transported it back to Jerusalem. And there's a great Herzl memorial there. And it came because in that Dreyfus trial, a young man said, there's going to be action, not going to be just like all the others. And he let this conviction mold his soul. Now you know, you hear it often, that there are many other examples of this. Many other examples of that. Hudson Taylor out, on the seashore. And out of his dedication to Christ came the whole China Inland Mission movement with its hundreds and hundreds of people. And his books go marching on. And there are many other illustrations. And Augsburg is a place where young men and women are brought somehow. I think everyone really, is brought face to face somehow with the call of life and the call of struggle and the call of suffering and the call of Christ.